everyone to the show. So today's guest is someone I'm really looking forward to learn from. We have Cliff Locks. He's a executive coach, investor, serial entrepreneur, advised Fortune 500 leaders as well, and spent years and years of experience helping others build wealth and legacy, not just quick money. So this conversation isn't just about business. It will be a little bigger, how to think big, how to lead better, and playing the long game. So I'm here to learn uh, about how Cliff built his mindset, how he coaches top executives, high performers, and as founder and creator, what we can take as a takeaway to level up our own journey as well. So let's dive in. Thank you so much for joining, Cliff. Let's take a start from your introduction. If you can, tell the audience about yourself.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Muhammad. I just want to thank you for inviting me today to the Buzz Hour podcast, and the value that you share with your listeners is really huge. So, a lot to be proud of. So, again, I'm Cliff Locks. I'm an entrepreneur, executive coach, chief marketing officer. I have built and sold three companies. The last one I sold to a Fortune 500 company, but I started out very, very humble. I'm located in the U.S. I have clients, globally. They could be in Dubai, Germany, the UK, Ireland, India. Uh, they're all over the world, and it's just a privilege to be able to help others find wealth for themselves. So you asked me about my journey. Includes this passionate understanding of teams, really understanding how we get a group of individuals aligned to create a very thoughtful process to serve our clients. Okay, so I owned an ad agency. I owned a professional sports marketing company, and then I owned what we call a special events company, which in this case, I ran 23 international new car shows. So it gave me the ability to, really understand at the end of the day, I'm responsible, or my team is responsible for driving, hundreds of thousands of consumers into, let's say if it's a show, to be able to enjoy, the day with their family, to see new cars, and really understanding what motivates an individual and then motivates a consumer. And then if we're doing B2B, to understand that relationship where we go a little deeper, meaning if we take care of on the B2B side, our customer, but we go down one more level, how do we look after the customer's customer? You start to see this will permeate some of the conversations that we have. Most people stop just at their client. And if you go deeper into really how do we provide value and help our clients create value for their clients, it becomes very sticky. You get this long-term relationship of trust, and you're enthusiastically, you're really moving in a great direction because you care. You really want others to thrive and do some great things in their lives. So, mentoring is a big piece of my life at this point. I had mentioned it's around the globe. Um, you find some really bright people out there. Each one is doing something a little different, a little bit. Sometimes the background could be radically different. It could be somebody in India that's coming out of a poor area. Or it could be somebody out of Africa that's trying to figure it out in Nigeria. Yet I partnered with somebody. I was his first client. It's interesting. 5 years ago, before artificial intelligence, but he had created artificial intelligence back 5 years ago, and it was a writing app. And I see that we reconnected and we created a nice strategic partnership together. And it's a privilege to be able to serve him, okay, because they're a little underbanked in Nigeria. So at times I'll be his bank and handle the transaction pieces, and he's using my email, software that I use, which is a company called ReachMail. And 2 months ago, we mailed 1.3 million emails out of, I have quarter of a million emails sitting in my email from clients and prospects. So, when you get to think about it, it's pretty exciting. Um, what else have I done in my life? I've had the privilege of leading a company with 250 employees. We had 2 million square feet. I know a lot of people are thinking metric. Okay, here in the US, we look at it square feet. Sorry about that. But 2 million square feet, you need a golf cart to get around. It's more like a campus. And then the idea of a really thoughtful piece for our listeners is what happens if we take our mindset and we think about what happens if we go elephant hunting? So, elephant hunting means go after the larger enterprise clients. The sales cycle will be a little longer, but they have a lot more resources, meaning financial resources, to pay us for our services. So in my case, with the team I was working with over, with the 2 million square feet and the 250 team members, I opened up Amazon, I opened up Walmart, and they gave me introductions, warm introductions to their clients, which were vendors in essence, because they buy and it gets resold. In Amazon, only I think about 15% of the products are sitting there that Amazon's buying for themselves and selling. It's resellers, okay, at the end of the day. But a lot of times Amazon will take the responsibility for what we call product returns. So somebody bought something, and for some reason they decided they wanted to return it. And there's a supply chain that has to be set up because very little should go into the dump. All right. So the idea is repurposing product to be able to be resold as refurbished or remanufactured into the market creates a more economic and a greener solution to product returns. So, at the end of the day, when you really look at things, for our listeners and even myself, the data is probably one of the most important things that we have that's available to us. So the data is this richness. We can go back to the product returns. Why did something come back? Did we get tens of thousands of a particular SKU or product that came back? Is there a functional defect in a product that's creating a serial return? So you're going into the data and you're looking at it, hopefully without any preconceived notions of why something happened. Then we start to look at the strong attributes of generative AI at this point. We could consider uploading, we can sanitize our data a little bit, meaning you don't know who the product is, who the company is, and ask the generative AI to help us find the patterns in the data and then help us come up with some of the hypotheses of why it's showing those abnormalities, meaning things that are out of range or there's a high correlation of complaints. And, at that point, that intelligence on the data is just a very, very pristine way to look at our companies and the learning. So, when you look at your vision and your precision and team alignment, it's magical. A lot of bright people, you know, when you look at some of the mentoring I've had in my life, you know, those pivotal influences, it's kind of interesting,
Yeah.
you know, when you get the mentorship that you need and the privilege of even thinking about a fiduciary responsibility to help the next generation, meaning
Yeah.
it's somebody's children, okay, young adults, that we can put some time and effort into and, guide those individuals so they can build some wonderful lives for themselves. And my mentor was a gentleman by the name of Brian Tracy. So Brian Tracy was really very prolific on sharing clarity and goal setting. So the word goal setting, and the goal setting with his expertise was writing the goals down on paper. What's unique is only 3% of the world has their goals written down on paper. So I have some videos that are on, one of my websites. I own a company called Millionaire Life Services. So Millionaire Life Services. And the ability to go out there and only 3% of the people have their goals written down on paper. Just think about that. So the schools are not teaching it. Mom and dad don't know it. Your
Yeah.
friends don't know it. But you could be, really, really powerful by taking the time to figure out what's important to you. Okay. It's sort of like a little roadmap. It could take 15, 20 minutes to write this down on paper. Yes, you can get a little bit more prolific, meaning a little bit more detail. A lot of times I'll use the word, you can put more detail and color into your goals. So the magic behind that, and Brian was very, very good at teaching this, was we have the conscious mind and we have the unconscious mind. So subliminally, the unconscious mind, we're not really thinking about what we're doing sometimes. So the brain is working at a very, very high speed. When you write your goals down, you actually have the opportunity to help the subconscious mind help you delineate what you'd like to achieve. So the brain goes to work, and the decisions we make for yes or no, things we're going to do during the day, if it's yes, it's moving you towards what you wrote down as your goals on paper. So it's interesting. You got this supercomputer, which is your brain. You just gave it what it needed for the computer instructions, which was your goals that you wrote down on paper that takes 15, 20 minutes. And it's very, very powerful. It's interesting. About 2 weeks ago, I bumped into, I have a folder for each one. I have three children. And I found the goals that my son had written down at a 14 years old. Just think about that. A 14-year-old wrote his goals down. Now, I don't know where he got this. One of the goals was he wanted to be a billionaire. No, I'm not a billionaire. Okay. Okay. There are billionaires out there. Okay. We're probably familiar with some of the folks out there. But where did a 14-year-old sort of get that? And then there was some other detail there, about jobs and career planning and things of that nature on his goals. But if you bring in the goal setting into your children's lives at a young age, just think about all those years. They have 80 years, let's say more. So a 14-year-old, 80 years, they're at 94. Okay. To put that work together, and you can change your goals. No one says you have to make it exact. It'll change. You probably, what I have found from my own life, you'll exceed what you wrote down on paper. And I had the privilege of doing this in my first year in college, where I met, Brian Tracy.
You discussed a lot about mentorship. So, what's the best time to get a mentor? So, when you're starting out a company in your startup stage, or maybe when you have achieved something and that you want to scale. So, what's the best timeline to get a mentor?
Yeah, I've had the privilege of being one of the co-founders of the Hyper Accelerator program. So the Hyper Accelerator program, we've run 7,200 students through this program. It's about 2.5 months. You know very, very quickly if someone's going to be able to scale by just asking some very intelligent questions and then on my end listening on the assessment piece. So in 15, 20 minutes, I'll know if that individual is going to be successful, if the odds are in their favor to be successful. So your question is, when should I get mentorship? Well, I suggested, hey, a 14-year-old could take it in the mentorship. There's a lot of self-improvement material that's available out there. A lot of it's online. It's free, but you got to take the time to, schedule it into your busy schedule. So if you're going to start a company, I would do it before you start the company, before you go out there and think you're going to go out and raise money. Raising money is not easy. Okay. Um, the ability to go out there and I find people that are unemployed sometimes come to me.
Hmm.
And then what gets me excited is that they don't just get employed. We bring some resources into their lives where they all of a sudden turn into, over a course of a year, year and a half, say 18 months, into one of the top individuals in their organization because they're getting the mentorship they need. And we're starting to learn about the dynamics in that ecosystem, meaning the business that they're in, or if they're going to start a business, what that founding team looks like. So some of the characteristics of a winning team, it's interesting. So these are broad ideas, but we need three characteristics. We need the hipster,
Okay.
the hustler, and the hacker. So think about a hipster, the
Hustler.
hustler,
Yeah.
and the hacker. So think about, you got a CTO, a chief technology officer, somebody that's doing some coding. Okay, they're the hacker. You got the hipster who's cool and is trying to, put out the persona, build out the brand. Okay, set the culture for the company. And then you go back in and you look at the hustler. He's over there. He's really probably part of the sales team, bringing clients in, helping to share the high value that the team is going to provide the client. And so when you're looking at life, there's never a bad time to get the mentorship you need. In my case, I've had the privilege, I have a 92% track record of making multimillionaires out of my clients.
Amazing.
Just think about that. And it's a privilege when others are doing well. That makes me happy. So, the legacy of going in my life is, how do you give and help others to thrive and build great lives for themselves? And the mentorship I'll provide is a little bit more in depth. It's not just business. I go into the family life, what's going on in the dynamics, so the whole individual can actually get the resources they need, or at least a thoughtful process to build a wonderful life for themselves. When you're starting to look at, what is the highest level thing we can do in life, is probably being a dad or a mom. But when you're a great dad and you're a great mom and a loving parent, You really care about your kids, and you start to bring, if it's okay with the listeners, the idea of bringing the goal setting in early into their lives. What's important to them? Here in the U.S. and it's global, we have Boy Scouts. So Boy Scouts, when the boys get into, they do Cub Scouts and they move into Weeblos and they go into Boy Scouts. So it's like three levels. The Boy Scouts was all about career planning. So there's 125 different merit badges that a boy can earn. Now the girls are invited into Boy Scouts, okay, because now they're calling it scouting, okay. Um, if you enjoy camping or nature, camaraderie, leadership, figure out the career planning within the scouting community. So scouting is done well because I've been on the board of directors for 15 years of the scouting. If it's fun, it's safe, you're learning, you're running the program correctly.
Makes
All
sense.
right, so think about that. If it's fun, it's safe, and you're learning, and the learning is leadership too.
Yeah.
That's a major piece of it. The words getting in front of a group of young people and be able to articulate, you know, your thinking or planning, project management, personal management, meaning the financial side. One of the badges, which is interesting, I think it's very prominent, sitting down with mom and dad, running the numbers. What does it cost to either, rent an apartment or a home or buy a home? What's the cost of actually acquiring or buying a car and insuring it, servicing it? Most of our young people have no idea what it costs to run a household or run the family. But the personal management merit badge addresses those items. They talk about a credit card. There's good debt and bad debt.
Yeah.
In other words, you could buy doodads, meaning things that are nice to have, but you don't really need, or you could do a planned, do the research on a planned purchase. It could be a TV or something, or maybe folks are going to get a car. And you're starting to do that resources out there to figure out which car is it going to be. In the US, we have Consumer Reports, which is a not for profit that does review on products. It's available online, consumerreports.org. To dig in deeper, and somebody's reviewed various different competitive products in a category to figure out which is the better product, that has a long life, value for the money that you're going to spend. So I guess the takeaway today is, when you look at leadership and you look at discipline and consistent growth and laser focusing on those results, meaning really hyper focusing on the value that you can bring forth in the relationships you have. It could be within the family or in business. You know, to me, when you pair entrepreneurial experience and you're responsible for making payroll
Yeah. Yeah.
and receivables, accounts payable, that's an entrepreneur. In other words, somebody that's sitting there, is part of a team. And at the end of the day, to make payroll, you got to bring in revenue at this point.
Yes.
Right? It's easy to burn investors' cash, but to build a real profitable company that self-sustains and continues to grow is magical. Meaning, it's not hard to do, but it's a very thoughtful process. So,
Great.
um,
So, so you've talked about and getting enterprise clients as well. So, what's the mindset shift that you really need to think big, getting enterprise, going out for high ticket clientele? So you have taught a lot of people this mindset. So, what's the key takeaway? Very summarized version of how to achieve this kind of mindset.
you know, it was very, very impactful when you look at the goal setting piece. Okay. I'll show you something here. In other words, I have the privilege of really thinking about these are my books.
Look.
So I took the time to take my thoughts and write them in 7 books. So empowering your leadership, and success in the AI era. Okay. The tools are out there. We can go in deeper into the AI. I'm very, very comfortable with, describing it. But yet at the same time, you could still be a self-made millionaire. Okay. Now, realize money gives you what? It gives you the ability to go out there and experience a wider group. You could travel, you can go on vacation, you can, your family, the kids could go to a better college if that's what you want. But it just gives you opportunities. It's not about flaunting it. It's just What experiences could you have if you had some resources and you weren't living paycheck to paycheck? Here, how to achieve success fast.
Right.
It's not a thick book, but it's very, very thoughtful. And the goal setting piece is actually addressed in here very, very nicely. The other piece of it is here. You want the kids to do well, right? So, key strategies to encourage your children, you know, to be successful and, to learn and to flourish and to be independent.
Yeah.
All right. This is another book that I wrote here. Again, guiding the next generation. We brought that up earlier. So they can thrive and build continued success, really about the family legacy. We want the kids to do well. My last book. There's a lot of people running around that are angry.
Yeah.
You don't have to be angry. You sort of get what we call an aura. You get a feeling before you get angry. One of the takeaways I'll share with our listeners is when somebody you think that somebody's trying to get you angry, okay, or get you mad. You can always give this thoughtful idea. You could use these words. I feel you're trying to hurt me. I feel you're trying to get me angry. I feel. Now, you didn't attack the other individual. Think about that. You just said, this is my feelings. Again, feelings are not right or wrong. They're your feelings. I feel you're trying to get me upset. So it gives a little bit of time for the individual that has said something to you, okay, that you don't agree with, let's suggest, to rethink what their objective is. They may not even be aware of it. So the idea of diffusing something really early on, I think, is really a wonderful way to go through in life. The idea that there's a rhythm to life. Who's responsible for the individual? Let's think about it. I tell people, go to the bathroom, point the finger in the mirror, and that's who's responsible at the end of the day. Okay? Think about it. You're in the mirror and you're pointing the finger in the mirror. It's yourself. Okay? At the end of the day, you can blame anyone you want. It's just the end of the day. The only one that can actually make either the self-improvements or come to the engagement with a little bit more enthusiasm, to really make things work, to continue to learn. Let's talk about some of the generative AI tools at this point. It's a wonderful time to be alive.
Yeah.
It's tremendous. In other words, and creating, some really thoughtful workflows, meaning we're going to do a job. What happens if we actually take the time and we plan it a little bit, and then we start to look at some of the generative AI tools where we're laying out what the day looks like, and it's actually asking some insightful questions, because you have to create a prompt, an engineered prompt, let's say, you have to ask it. So let's suggest that you and I, we're going to be a marketing manager, okay? So we could go back to generative AI and we could say, look, I'm a marketing expert. I'm a prominent ad agency CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, with an effective, award-winning team that creates effective marketing programs that drive awareness, rememberability, and strong and precise calls to action. Then you describe whatever the business you're in or whoever the client's business is in. It's going to come back with a very, very thoughtful output based on that you're an expert in marketing. And the team that you're working with are marketing experts. Now, this works for a CEO. You could say I'm a thoughtful CEO and my clients are, you describe them. It will take that and the output will represent the criteria of that individual in that position. Or I'm a CFO, Chief Financial Officer. I'm head of marketing. I'm head of sales. So just give some thoughts. Remember, you don't have to. ChatGPT doesn't care.
Yeah.
Claude, or Grok doesn't really care, what you put in on the front end. But by taking the time to suggest the positioning, it actually gives it the tools to give you better output that reflects more hyper-specific deliverables for you on what it is. Um, to me, it's just tremendous, the tools that are available to us today for our young people, for our team members to be able to, really go in and dive. You can upload a document, you could sanitize the document. Now, I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert on, I'll upload a document. I'll ask ChatGPT to delete it when it's done. It comes back, says it deleted it.
Yeah.
Now, do I know what's going behind the algorithm? I don't want to say I know. So I'm just trying to say to you, before you upload something, give some thoughts on. You could sanitize, meaning remove any client's names, your company name, whatever it is, and then you could upload something. Just be conscious that there is a large language model, and it's been studying a lot of material. Okay, it's part of the whatever we're uploading is probably part of that large language model at some point. All right. Um,
And then in terms of so goal setting, uh, so when you were
mhm.
telling me about goal setting and everything, uh, there might be different stages in life when your goal differentiates. So right now, whatever thing that I can think of comes back to the money problem. That, oh, I need maybe vacation.
Okay.
It's a money problem. I need to maybe enjoy with my parents. Uh, Money problem. So everything that I think right now comes back to money, and I think a lot of people might be having similar situation. Whenever they're writing a goal, it associates back to the money problem. So
Okay.
how do you, in your perspective, how do you see that? What's the right way to get out of monetary values and then attribute everything? But because eventually it might be coming back to money again and again.
Well, let's think about what money is. It's some sort of measurement on value. So I'll give you an example. In the United States, and you'll teach me if we have it where you are and our listeners are. When you look at the scale of justice, so it's a woman in robes. It has a double beam scale. So,
Yeah.
okay, she's blindfolded. So justice is supposed to be blind. Doesn't matter who's there. It should be, equal to all. One of those beams is money. The other beam is value. Can we create the value that's 10x greater than the money we're asking for? Just give that some thought. In other words, 10x times the value versus the money. So if we're a team member, say we're an employee, we're working for a team or a company. If my salary is, I'm going to talk USD, is 100,000 USD, I need to return $1 million worth of value to that company. That's 10x the $100,000. Just add another zero at the 100,000, you get $1 million. So just give some thought. You as an employee, our listeners, you have a fiduciary responsibility to create 10x value for whoever you're working for. It could be the client, it could be the employer.
Yeah.
Okay. Most people don't realize that employer needs to make a profit. Our clients need to make a profit on what we're bringing them so they can continue to amplify and grow their fine organization and handle payables and payroll. And so we live in an ecosystem. So money, money, money. Okay, let's talk about money. So if we created 10x value for somebody else, the money wouldn't be an issue because you're giving them 10 times the value. Now, figuring out you have generative AI, how do I create 10 times the value in this engagement, my position? It'll come back with a thoughtful output that
Yeah.
you could read through and actually consider. So, what I'm trying to say is you don't have to figure it out all on your own. The tools got easier now to actually work that through. And what do I do for coaching? My coaching is, one of the companies I work with is a company called DeepL. And DeepL, if you need a translation, is the number one company in the Europe, in the EU. And we're looking at, how do you work with an individual that's impactful within that organization? Now he's the top ninth employee, but he was the 50th employee. Now they got 1,500 employees, but now he's the top ninth employee. It's not an accident. It was plan and execution.
Mhm.
So, you know, I'm a futurist. I look out 3, 5, 10 years out, and I'm looking at, all right, what are we building? And can we interject some of that futuristic thinking into what we're doing on a day to day basis? So we're really ahead of the curve and we're thoughtful on what we're bringing forth either to a client, to the employer on value. There's some resources that are sitting out there. You can see I've created some books here. It really drives back to that concept of you want wealth. Okay, you want to build some wealth. Well, the money is going to come from somewhere. Okay. So you need to figure out what value are you going to create and drive to be able to get the financial benefit, the resources you want to create the wealth. There's really a very nice cause and effect. So when I brought something up earlier, the idea of going elephant hunting, who are the large enterprises that we may be able to bring in as a client? It'll take a little longer on the sales cycle because there's some decisions, okay, that need to be made. But if you're thinking about how do I create 10x the value versus the money I'm going to charge, it's a lot easier to get somebody's attention. So, is it hard to do? The answer is it's thoughtful. It's not hard. It's that thinking piece. Why did I try to get you to, I'm trying to communicate and trying to gently motivate our listeners. You need to write your goals down on paper. Okay. You can change your mind. You don't have to share it with anybody else. You can share it with your spouse. When you're looking at life, how do you bring your best self to the engagements? Could be work, home, family, what it may be. Okay. I'm going to shock our listeners. You ready?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Our girlfriends, fiancés, and our wives are smarter and have better intuition than the men.
Hmm.
Okay. Not everybody's going to agree with that. If you think about some of the countries that we're in, it's a little different, but they're very, very, very bright. So I'll give you another example. My wife, all right, I'm married 38 years. Okay. On our first date, she asked if there was an auto show in a building because we had gone to our first date was at a boat show. Okay. There was no car show in this building. And again, I'm running an ad agency and a professional sports marketing company. I go into the executive offices and I ask, is there a car show here? They said no. 6 months later, I created a car show in the Nassau Coliseum, which is on Long Island, which is in New York. Okay. And some folks may know about the Islanders, which would be a hockey team. And they've won a Stanley Cup about 3 times already. Um, and you're finding that the women are very, very bright. Remember, my exit to a Fortune 500 was her idea. Realize I built it, but she was an intricate part of, and she was the stimulating, thoughtful process to create auto shows and then sell it to a Fortune 500 company. Okay, so just give some thoughts. How do we take it? The other piece that may shock our listeners: your wife. You should put her up on a pedestal, and you should look after her interests. Okay,
Yeah.
you should open up the car door for your wife. You should take the chair when she's ready, before she's going to sit down, you should pull it back out and you should help her sit and push it back in. Be a gentleman, be a classy individual. You know, my wife is kind, she'll cook. Okay. A very good cook. I'll do the dishes. I don't have a problem with it. It's these small things, laundry's done. I'll help fold the clothes. It's just these small things make a large positive impact on our spouses. Children, you'll find I have 2 books there for children. You need to spend quality time with your children. You can't delegate that.
Yeah.
Okay. You need to bring the kids to work. They need to know what you're doing. All right. So when I brought the kids to the auto show, I put a walkie-talkie on them. Okay. Security knew who they were. So they're wandering around. All right. So, but there's, tens of thousands, depending on what day. It could be over 100,000 in the building, over that period of the day. And the kids are wandering around a little, you got to be a little concerned a little bit. But so when you're looking at it, I think we should talk business over dinner. How do we get the kids to, understand some of the decision making that's going on within your life? You can have a conversation. You could ask them to stimulate. What do they think? One of the lovely thing about children in the next generation in our companies, they don't have the same level of I can't do that or that doesn't work. It's this freshness that they bring forth because they don't have the roadblocks, that thinking that, this, and sometimes I'll call it stinking thinking. And Brian Tracy, you can put a rubber band on your wrist there and you can snap yourself with that rubber band. You really need to keep the self-talk to be positive because subconsciously you're making decisions all day long. You're making positive decisions. You wrote your goals down. You're going to be very, very successful. You're going to exceed what you wrote down in your goals. Does it work? Our listeners, it always works. It's crazy. It really, really works. So think about it. Your brain is a supercomputer that's more powerful than any of the computers out there. They're trying to create mesh networks, meaning multiple computers hooked together to try to duplicate the brain. All right. We all have this, we all have the same amount of time in the day. We all put our, pants on one leg at a time. We're all the same. It's just what we're doing during the day. How many zeros are behind what we're doing on that 10x the value makes the positive impact. Right. So when you're looking at mentoring and coaching, we're really getting into the nuances. We're sort of creating this effective scorecard to help an individual. And part of it is, and these may be terms, KPIs or OKRs, the idea that, key performing indicators. How do we know when we get to something and we've been successful? So if we set some metrics, a scorecard on the front end and we reach it, you suggested it's money, money, money. Okay. If you had $80,000 worth of income, you had $100,000 worth of income, 150,000, you know, a great year could be 450,000 USD. That's a lot of money to somebody, right? So again, how do you plan and execute? Do you ever play pinball with a steel ball?
Yeah.
Okay. And we might be dating ourselves a little bit, but our listeners, you guys are great people. So the pinball games have this, a steel ball sitting inside there, and they have a little plunger you pull back, and the ball, pops in there, and it flies out, and then you're ringing up some points. It's hitting some barriers up there, and it's ringing up points. The ball may go down the middle, and you may lose the ball. It may go down the sides. Now, the sides could have two sides to it. One, you lose the ball. The other one, it comes in, and you get to use the flippers.
Hmm.
Look, you may round up enough points in life where there's a little stopper that comes up right in the middle so the ball can't go down and you can use the flippers to flip it back up. But when you plan and execute, you really have a game of life, which is the pinball machine, let's say, of being able, all right, it's going to go down the inner side, not the outside. I'm not going to lose the ball. In other words, if you don't plan and execute, things are just going to happen to you and you're going to complain. But if you plan and execute, you're fully responsible for what's taking place in your life. You need the 10x worth of value to the individuals you interact with. All right. So now you have this thoughtful process. All right, how do I provide value? Oh, I got the generative AI. I could ask generative AI, how do I create value for, and you just describe what you're building or what you're working on, your responsibility at work, coming up with a path for the children. They need chores at home. So our children need to do some work around the house. You should involve them in any kind of projects that you're doing. You're building a deck, you're doing some gardening, you're going to mow the lawn. Again, age appropriate, whatever you're doing. But they need to use tools, power tools at appropriate age with proper safety and training. Just the idea of, how do you create a well-rounded individual that is independent?
Yeah.
Somebody that's able to go out there, build a wonderful life for themselves, make a large sum of funds, in essence, become wealthy on their own. And in our old age, the kids may take care of us. In the Asian communities, they do. It's just part of it. In the US, it's less so. Okay. So there's cultural differences. It's all right. But at least you understand that, be clear, on the front end what your expectations are.
And then,
Um,
how do you get out of the comfort zone that you have right now? So, for example, whatever your ceiling is, monetary or objective wise, the typical challenge is that once you get comfortable, it's much difficult for you to push back again to new set of goals or achievements. So, how
right.
do you typically solve that kind of problem?
We get into habits.
Okay.
Some people may call it a rut. We've always done it this way.
Okay.
But if you're looking for innovation and you're looking to create a difference in your actual, let's go back to the money, okay, and you're looking to increase your compensation or your ability to be thoughtful in being able to ask for a raise. So again, you have that 10x, okay. Did you really create a program where you're creating more value for the company? So if you brought $1 million in, or you were, helping impact something, there was $1 million worth of impact to the company, and you wanted $100,000, it's probably pretty easy for the upper management or the owner of the company to recognize value. I'll give you another idea. You can create the goals. You can create a little plan. ChatGPT loves to come up with plans. How do I create a plan to do what? This is what I do all day long. I mean, you can list all the, items that you do. We have something called agentic AI, which is going to be bots,
Hmm.
meaning it'll take a camera, watch what you're doing, or record the keystrokes. It'll automate all that. I mean, it's already exists. It's not out there prominently at this point. One of my concerns is if you get into the rut, and it's always been that way, the generative AI has you have a choice. You can either, and Microsoft did something really well. They used the word co-pilot, so it coexists with the executive to assist the executive and make them more effective. But it's also able to do a lot of the redundancy of that work that they're doing. So now a lot of companies, what they're doing is they're slowing the hiring, and they're saying, what generative AI tools or automation can we put into the organization so we don't have to increase headcount? So I'm just gently trying to warn our listeners at this point. It's time to really get up to speed, meaning go out there, watch the YouTubes, the education in your field on generative AI, become an expert at it. Another piece is you probably need to stay with something for 3 to 5 years to become an expert. Can't jump over, and doing a multitude of things. So if you stay with something for 3 to 5 years, become an expert, and you get paid like an expert. So again, we're addressing money. So if you stay with something, you become an expert at it, you'll get paid like an expert. Okay. So generalists don't make a lot of money. Experts make a lot of money. So just give that some thought. If you think about a surgeon, or you think about, somebody that's a chief financial officer, at one point they may have been a controller, which would be a lower, or a bookkeeper to a controller. They may have gone back to school to become a CPA, a certified public accountant. So there's some degree programs that are available out there. One of the major takeaways is lifetime learning. And now the generative AI has made it easier to do the generative learning, that lifetime learning, because you can ask it, what do I need to know to excel in this particular position? The other piece is we have access to LinkedIn. If you go out there and you start to look at some of the other individuals that you want to aspire to, meaning you think that they've had great careers, they list all the positions, meaning the companies they work for and the titles. You can go back to generative AI and say, I'm here at this title. I want to go to this title, this title, this title. Meaning you're looking at somebody else's profile, LinkedIn profile, and how their career moved. And you can ask, what do I need to learn to be able to move up in the ranks and have this higher position? Let's say a chief financial officer, CEO. I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to start my own company. What do I need to know? So, I think when we're doing things right in life, we're having fun. And life is not all fun, but a lot of it is the thinking. In other words, if you think life is really going well for you and your family and your coworkers and stuff, and you really want to have an enjoyable relationship with people, and you build trust, and you really care about people, one of the takeaways, one of the uniqueness that we all have, we can't take a nickel with us. Meaning, think about it. When we go in life, you take no money with you. So build this life that you're really going to enjoy, okay? Do right by others, take care of your family, help empower your children so they can be independent and have great lives. They're going to outdo you when you do it right. Your kids are going to out earn you and get into better positions, and just be proud for them. So, angry people don't make a lot of money. In other words, they're toxic. All right. I tell people that I'm working with, if you got toxic people, give them my book on anger. If they don't clean up their act on the anger piece, because we're giving them all the tools in there on how to get past the anger piece. Okay. You got to let them go. Toxic people it's like cancer. It's like a bad apple in in a bin or something. The mold and mildew, ends up, toxicity, it's cancer. You got to cut it out. Now, my suggestion is to try to help that individual, because we don't know what's going on in their lives. Somebody may have a health issue, maybe a spouse lost money, lost their position or something, and they need to get another position. They need both incomes for the family to thrive or cover their bills. We don't know the backstory, so sometimes it takes time to ask, to have that one-on-one, to figure out what's going on in somebody's life. They were productive, now they're not. There's a trigger that's sitting in there. And I'll give you another example. I know we're winding down. In life, we have a choice on the ups and downs in life. Just give this some thought. You could take a pebble, a little rock, and you could throw it into a pond, and you get little ripples. Or we can go to the Atlantic Ocean and we can throw a rock in, and there's huge waves in the Atlantic Ocean depending on the weather out there. You have a choice in life. Do you want the pebble in a pond, little ripples in life, the ups and downs in life? Or do you want the ocean, which is, hey, you
Great.
get these huge ups and these huge downs, the wave crests. So, when you're looking at it, life is full of choices.
Hmm.
When you make good choices and you're trying to help others build great lives for themselves, it's magical.
And then, what's your take on the focus part? So, a lot of entrepreneurs every day there's new technology coming in. Then they next day they have next big idea. There's a lot of FOMO as well, and then the new generation as well coming into businesses or maybe employed somewhere. They lack that focus because of the information overload as well. So for example, one fine day I wake up, oh, he's earning more than me, he's doing well than me. So
Sure.
it's due to that overload. So how do you train different kind of leaders and entrepreneurs and even young people as well on how to stay focused in terms of whatever they're building or doing in their lives?
When you go in and you start to do, I run a program called the Executive Ascend Blueprint. I create a blueprint for somebody in their life. We do it collaboratively together. When you really understand what value are we bringing forth to solve some sort of a client's challenge, in other words, what are we solving at the end of the day? Okay, who are we solving it for? When you start to look at and this may be a term many of us may be familiar with or not, and I'll get into a little bit more detail. When we look at the persona or avatar of our best customer, so there's a characteristics of the best customer who we're serving. The client many times may come in and ask you to do more for them if they trust you. They may share additional opportunities to solve some of their challenges or needs. So you're focusing on something. So when you're going in and you're focusing, again, it's like the expert. They're going to get paid like an expert. You have to focus on something. You can't be everything to everybody. So the takeaway there is, what's the future look like impactfully based on what you built today? Now, an entrepreneur, their early days, their company's going to look really, really different 3 to 5 years. They're going to pivot. They're going to have to figure out how to create a very profitable company. Or they took investment money, they're going to burn through the investment money, they're going to need to do another raise. Now, it's easier to focus and create revenue. So when you're looking at somebody that's, let's say some of our listeners are saying, I need to go out and raise an investment. It's a heck of a lot easier to go out there and raise money from an investor if you have $1 million worth of annual reoccurring revenue. Now, you don't need to do $1 million or had done $1 million. It's just you're on that trajectory of doing $1 million. So if you took the forward 12 months, or X amount of months behind, and the next few months to get to 12 months, would you be doing $1 million? That's a much easier company to fund, with the risk profile, because they really have figured out a lot of things at that point if they have $1 million worth of annual reoccurring revenue. Okay. The next shiny thing, let's talk about the next shiny thing. A lot of money went into generative AI. It's the next shiny thing. But when you really look at the outcome, and the results, and the tools that are in there that you can put, like I use something called Phantom. So again, it's Phantom for our listeners, and it plugs into my Zoom calls. It comes in there. The next steps, action items from that call are nicely listed right there. All I say to my clients, if you go out and do these few things, next steps and action items, you're a rock star, okay? Because we're really hyper focused on deliverables to help them with their careers and what's going on within either their life, personally, family, and the business piece. And we don't need to do a lot, out here. It's just, when you're looking at it's insightfulness. Why do I make, multi-million, 92% of my clients are multimillionaires, after I have the quality time together. We're focused on answering what it is. What are we really building? How do we build this intuition? How do you set up those quarterly financial targets and goals? So, life is a wonderful opportunity. You get to take responsibility for it. And how do you stay focused? you know, I I don't think it's as hard as people think. I think you need those, the metrics to figure out that scorecard to figure out what are we doing really, really well, and we're getting good feedback. And we need to ask the clients, are we meeting your expectations? Um, and then I think the other piece is listening. In other words, if you ask the client, well, how can we improve? They'll tell you.
Makes
You
sense.
can do a survey and you can ask for some feedback. You can get rated. In other words, to understand, you have, there's other terms that our listeners can, sort of use generative AI, ask about SLA. So SLA, and it'll come back to setting metrics up with a client on deliverability. Like you and I, let's say we have a computer contract, we're using some software. Well, they say they have a 98% uptime. Well, that's part of the SLA. So if they don't hit it, either they owe us a refund or there's a make good or something, or, I think any contracts that we have to have a cure process, meaning if somebody is not doing something correctly, we have to alert them, and they have 30 days or 60 days, whatever, you decide to put in a contract for corrective action. Okay. Um, we can get diverse, but the frameworks I think are really, important. So let's talk about some of the tools. You asked a very, very important question. So KPI stand for key performance indicators. So key performance indicators. And you can use the generative AI to figure this out. Another one is OKRs. So OKRs, and that stands for objectives and key results. Sort of the goal setting framework that aligns the team efforts, company wide priorities. So if you have the OKRs and what we're solving, who we're solving it for, you don't get this, running after the next thing. No, you're measuring between the KPRs and the OKRs. There's other tools out there, like an EOS, which is an entrepreneurial operating system. It'll help you establish that clear vision, create accountability, and gain traction. Utilizing something, some folks may be familiar with the word agile. And then marketing sprints, meaning we're going to work on something for a period of time, set time, and then we'll again move on and we'll have some other focus periods, either on marketing activities or maybe the financial side of the business. So you're hyper focused on areas that need to get addressed, but only for a short period of time. You're putting it intensely, and you're getting rid of the interruptions. So one of the team members said to me, it was funny, a brilliant guy. Um, a team of, he was responsible for coding. So, you're talking about software development. They got one team member that's, is an expert in C++. So it's one of the languages that are out there. But the individuals, they're using Slack, and the individuals keep getting interrupted on the Slack channel. So what he did is this individual realized that this key employee needs not to be interrupted. He needs quality time to be able to put out high quality. In this case, it's going to be code. Okay. So he said, everybody else, don't involve him at all anymore. Just come to me, and I'll tell you if we need to get him involved. So he ran interference on behalf of this coder, and the individual in a week finished something that the individual thought was going to take 3 weeks because all the interruptions, it would have taken 3 weeks. By eliminating, allowing the individual just to concentrate on the high value, his expertise, he was able to do it in a short period of time. We all need to focus. I'll give you another example. I have 250 employees, not all of them, knocking on my door, but I had to close the door of my office. I need to focus. I need to concentrate. I'm opening up Walmart, Amazon. I've got these large companies. It could be an iRobot, a current coffee makers. What else was running through there? You may know Sunbeam, Mr. Coffee. I mean, a multitude of products. Most of this was kitchen appliances and floor care products. But the idea is, you need time to think. We could take a walk in nature and clear our head. Walk down by the stream, the river, whatever it may be, the beach. Clear your head. The brain needs some time to think. You need some downtime. So when you feel overloaded, at least be honest with yourself. Hey, I feel stressed. I feel overloaded. I need something better. And then you can go back to the generative AI if you choose to and ask it to help you with the scheduling software to figure out, am I really working on the most important things? Another takeaway for our listeners: if you do the top three things, the most important things you can do. So you list everything you need to do, and you actually put some sort of a point system to it. Say 10 is the most important thing you need to do. If you do the top three things that day over the course of a year, just think about it. Three times 270 working days, you're starting to figure out you got a lot accomplished in a year. So again, you're never going to get everything done on your list. But if you do the top three most important things in the early in the morning or whenever your circadian rhythm is, to be most productive, you get those three things done. At least you did the most important three things that day, and you continue to work on that. You know, the other thing before you leave the day, leave for the evening from wherever you're working, make a list of what you need to do tomorrow. I'll use Calendly. Well, I'm sorry. Well, I use Calendly for people to get onto my calendar, but I use Outlook. What I'm going to do is all neatly printed out. I like to print things out. I have my calendar sitting in front of me, but others will just use whatever their phone or, the desktop, whatever is good. The brain really likes organization. It likes project management. You know, the reason people go to the university, know, they teach you how to shut your mouth and open up your ears and learn. And then also think about it. You're going to have to do projects. You're going to have to turn them in on time. You're going to get judged. You're going to get graded. That's life.
Very nice. We'll jump into the last question. So I ask this question from all my guests. So apart from your case is different because you're an author as well. So I'll be getting your books as well. Uh, Apart from your books, what is the any personal best book that you can recommend for the audience uh, that can really shape someone's future or future trajectory?
Well, you brought up money. Let me grab something from my book. Okay, so take a sec. Okay. This is a gift for our listeners because you're a VIP. I usually only share this with people that are clients.
Oh, thank you.
So Jack Chapman has a book called Negotiating Your Salary: How to Make $1,000 a Minute.
A minute.
It's not a thick book, but you can see all the tags. I use it as a working. Okay, so Negotiating Your Salary: How to Make $1,000 a Minute by Jack Chapman. Okay,
And this is helpful for entrepreneurs, employees, all of them, or it's just focused
remember
on.
the 10x value?
Yeah.
That's in that book.
Okay. Got
So
it.
in other words, it really helps you understand that when you're going in and you're looking for a job or you're looking for an increase in your pay, and you're negotiating something, you could get a bump within a couple of minutes. Maybe it's a $5,000 bump. I'm talking USD, but you may have a 5-minute conversation. You got a $5,000 bump. You just made $1,000 a minute. 5 minutes times 1,000 is 5,000. Okay. You need to look at it from a different perspective, from the hiring manager or the individual that you're reporting to. Where's that 10x of value? How do you articulate the value and how you increase the value to drive revenue within the organization or reduce costs or help a client increase their revenue or help them take care of their clients?
Makes
There's
sense.
your $1,000 a minute. When you get in there and you start to use, and the generative AI tools are getting easy to use, to really go in there and do something very thoughtful. The other piece of it, I'll leave this, there's something called a SWOT analysis. The idea that you can go in, put some sort of a problem and ask it to do, sort of the SWOT. Uh, it'll go in there and it'll be very, very thoughtful on the output on areas that need to get addressed. So SWOT. I won't teach you what it is right now, and you'll go out and use the generative AI against it, and you're going to be like pleasantly, you're going to get blown away in a positive way. In other words, it's really, really powerful. And it creates this thoughtfulness that a lot of times people are, sort of not blind to, but they haven't really given it any consideration. You need this feedback on what are you working on and what should we be concerned about. Looks at the competitive landscape. Some of the competitors are out there, things that you need to solve. Um, and the takeaway: be happy in life. In other words, plan some time to, some downtime so you can do some thinking. Take responsibility for yourself. Don't point the finger to anyone else. You want to point the finger, go in the bathroom, point the finger in in the mirror. That's who's responsible at the end of the day. Seriously, I mean, it's just,
Yeah, it's very powerful takeaway actually.
yeah. In other words, no nonsense, no BS.
Yeah.
You know, and I want to thank you. I'm very, very appreciative, Mohammed. The Buzz